Well, okay, I mean, I'm not really very qualified to talk about the history of Mayapur. I'll just try to give a slightly different angle on understanding what's going on in Mayapur now, with the historical perspective of looking back at the time when Lord Chaitanya actually appeared here in Mayapur. During that time, we could say that Lord Krishna, the importance of Vrindavan, just the whole pilgrimage places establishing or commemorating Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan were practically lost at that time. If you remember Lord Chaitanya, when he went to Vrindavan himself, then there were so many places of pastimes which had been kind of covered over. For instance, Radhakund, Lord Chaitanya saw there was some pool of water in the middle of the field, and he immediately, of course, being Krishna, recognized that this is Radhakund. But the local people had no idea of Radhakund. They had largely forgotten all the different places of Krishna's pastimes. So one of the things that Lord Chaitanya had to do was to revive those places, because if you want to carry on a tradition, you have to maintain the places where certain events took place. It's one thing to talk about them, to have some written description, as there are in the Bhagavatam and other Puranas, Krishna's Leelas and pastimes, but without the actual manifestation of the places, then it gives less credibility to just, the descriptions. So we had a situation 500 years ago where Vrindavan was practically forgotten. Krishna's pastimes and activities were considered to be mythological, in the sense of being an imagination or like a fairy tale. Lord Chaitanya, in order to bring the teachings into a more real sense for new practitioners, therefore ordered the 6 Goswamis and others to reside in Vrindavan and to rediscover all the places where Krishna had done his Leelas. So now we have the end result 500 years later, where we go to Vrindavan. We have our Vrindavan Parikrama, Braj Mandala Parikrama for 1 month. We can walk all over the areas, and every day you can see different places where Krishna was doing different activities. That makes the philosophy, in one sense, become more real. Of course, for advanced devotees they don't require, but for the newer neophyte devotees, then the more manifestations of the philosophy in the physical world there are, the more credible and the more believable they are. So as that was going on in Lord Chaitanya's time, he ordered those places to be renovated. Then in a similar way now we find that after Lord Chaitanya's appearance here in Mayapur, because that also is places of pastimes were lost for some period. It was predicted that after Lord Chaitanya's disappearance, the whole of Navadvip would become covered by the Ganges for 100 years. So that came about, and we find that up to the time of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, this actual land of Mayapur was covered over, it was lost. There is another place on the other side of the Ganga in Navadvip, which claims to be the birth site of Lord Chaitanya. Although when Bhaktivinoda Thakur came here as the magistrate, he spent a great deal of time looking through the old records, and he found that the current city of Navadvip was actually had only been manifest maybe 100-150 years, so it could not have been the place where Lord Chaitanya appeared. And then of course we know the story of Bhaktivinoda Thakur eventually finding the actual place of the Lord's birth, and now there's a temple there that was established, begun by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur built the temple that's there. That was opened, I think, in 1936. And since then, the followers of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati have done their best to establish the importance of Mayapur for the general public. So Prabhupada's godbrothers, some of them, they built temples here. And of course, then when Prabhupada came here in 1971, bought the first piece of land for ISKCON, then things began to very rapidly develop. And that development is really in line with the fulfillment of Lord Chaitanya's prediction that the chanting of the holy names would travel all over the world. Srila Prabhupada was the one who was able to manifest that prediction, if you bring it into actuality, in a very short period of time. Seemingly, Krishna consciousness spread all over the world. And in a similar way, when Prabhupada started his activities to build a temple here in Mayapur, things in Mayapur very rapidly began to develop. We've seen that now, of course, millions of people come here from not just all over Bengal, but actually all over the world due to Srila Prabhupada's preaching. So Prabhupada is helping to uncover the glories of the Holy Dham, and that will continue to increase more and more as time goes by. Prabhupada, of course, gave us the instruction to build the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, which he predicted would attract millions of people from all over the world, and it would challenge the current scientific, mechanistic worldview, and it would present an alternative view of the world and the universe as a living organism, as a place, a living abode, where different kinds of entities reside, where there's different levels of existence, and which, of course, in Mayapur's case, it's a manifestation of the original spiritual world. So we're presenting, or Prabhupada's presenting, the idea of life coming from life, and that this material realm is a manifestation from life, and not the other way around. Not that life is a manifestation of combinations of matter. So there's a parallel, I think, between what Prabhupada is doing and what was happening at the time of Lord Chaitanya, or was manifest by the immediate followers of Lord Chaitanya. They uncovered the holy Dham of Vrindavan and restored it to credibility. And in the same way, Srila Prabhupada, following in the footsteps of his spiritual master and his great spiritual master, great-grand spiritual master, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Prabhupada is also helping to now open the Dham up, if you like, and give access to the Dham by the preaching activities of his movement, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. All right. I'm not very expert on that one. Well, I can just say a little something. So, of course, you know, there is the story about Lord Nityananda Prabhu instructing Jiva Goswami about the different places in Mayapur Dham, and his prediction of there being an Audarya Mandir, or sorry, not Audarya, Adbhuta Mandir, an extraordinary temple would arise at some point in the future. And in line from that, then we have Bhaktivinoda Thakur, when he purchased his house across the Jalangi River in Swarupganj. Several times, at least twice, he had a vision where he looked out from his house across the river to this tract of what we call Mayapur now, and he saw a manifestation, a golden city glowing, and if you take the line of sight from Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house to the Yog Pit, the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya, you'll see that our ISKCON society, its land, and the temple that we're now building, the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, is directly in line of sight between Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house and the Yog Pit. So we're not claiming that what we're building is this Adbhuta Mandir. That will be for others to decide in the future, but we're going to build the best edifice that we can according to Srila Prabhupada's instructions. Prabhupada had that unique vision of including the planetarium inside the temple, and right from the very beginning we have photos of Srila Prabhupada in 1972 with a model of what was going to be a 100-foot high temple at that time, and then by 1977 we had a model that Prabhupada was advertising as the new future temple, and that one was about 400 feet high. As it is, the temple that we are building now is about 350 feet high, including the Kailash, so it's pretty big. But anyway, the point is that Bhaktivinoda Thakur really was the linchpin in the revival of the movement of Lord Chaitanya, and he had that vision of this transcendental city arising in what was at the time when he saw that vision. This was just a deserted tract of land. Nobody was living here practically. There was a couple of small villages, and it was seemingly in the middle of nowhere. But he saw this transcendental city. So in Prabhupada's time, at least when I was traveling with Prabhupada in 1976, he spoke frequently about Mayapur city, and there were news articles that were put out to the press describing a city of 50,000 persons, that it would be a center of learning and education about the real purpose of human life, its goals, etc. And although it was not actually manifest during Prabhupada's physical presence, he started the process, he planted the seed, if you like, and now we're starting to see the manifestation of that transcendental city. So we hope that, of course, that will continue on. But from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Srila Prabhupada, now our generation, and in future ongoing generations of Vaishnavas, we shall see Mayapur blossom and develop into a very big pilgrimage center, just as Vrindavan is. And you have other places in India like Tirupati, or you have other places, Rameshwaram. These are all temple cities, or cities which are developed around a deity or a particular temple. And in the same way, Mayapur also is developing and will become a very, very big city in the very near future. Right?
And the last point we would ask you that you are a Dhammavasi. You could tell us something about how you moved to Mayapur and left everything to settle here with your family.
Okay. Well, personally, we came to, my wife Sitala and my daughter Rasarani, we came to live here in Mayapur in 1996. We had attended the opening of Prabhupada's Samadhi in 1995, and we discovered that there was a small school here for catering for the international community, because at that time the international community was quite small, but it was beginning, to grow. So we had more or less had a determination. At that time we were living in Florida, in Alachua. We had this determination that when our daughter, who was born in 1992, when she came to school age, that we did not want to bring her up in the West. We were, not impressed with the pressure and the culture of the West, and the pressure that it puts on young people to behave in certain ways and speak in certain ways and act in certain ways and dress in certain ways, etc., etc. So we didn't like that, and we thought that Rasarani would have a much better chance of growing up as a Vaishnav, a Vaishnavi, if she was in a purer and more spiritual environment. So we were actually thinking about Vrindavan, but when we came here to Mayapur for the opening of the Samadhi in 1995, we were impressed with the facility. There was a small but growing community, and so we determined that this was the best place to bring Rasarani up. And of course it's the best place for our own spiritual lives as well. So we moved here at the very beginning of 1996. So what's that, about 19 years ago? 18 years ago. And we've, never regretted it, of course. We love Mayapur. It's been a wonderful influence for Rasarani growing up. She had many friends here, and she's come out to be a very nice Vaishnava in her own right, and so have all of her friends. And I've seen that most of the children that have been brought up here in Mayapur, they've experienced Krishna consciousness as a lifestyle. In the West, we tend to experience Krishna consciousness, philosophically at least. We know theoretically what it should be, how to live as devotees. But very often we feel our tiny attempts to live as devotees, it's in the face of overwhelming materialistic culture, and it seems a little bit artificial. But when you come here to Mayapur and stay for some time, it's just the natural culture. You live it, you breathe it, and everything that you see around you reminds you of the Krishna consciousness philosophy, Lord Chaitanya, etc. So it's just a lot more natural for the children, and we've seen many, many wonderful kids. They grow up here, they get very attached to being in Mayapur, they are serious devotees, and growing into adulthood, they're taking up lots of different kinds of responsibilities for their own spiritual lives and for the preaching of Krishna consciousness to others. So we're more than happy that we came here to Mayapur. We're ecstatic about it, as much as we can be, considering our conditioning. But we wouldn't want to live anywhere else. We have no ambition to be anywhere else except Mayapur, and especially, we're just on the edge or the verge of this very exciting development of this Temple of the Vedic Planetarium and we're seeing right before our very eyes this transcendental city is beginning to manifest. So we feel very fortunate that we were, here more or less at the beginning, if you like, of the fulfillment of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Srila Prabhupada's vision for Mayapur to become an emblem of Krishna consciousness all around the world. So we're deeply gratified that we've been allowed to stay here in the Dham, and of course we would like that to go on to the point at least when we have to leave these bodies, that we can do so in Mayapur. That will be the perfection of our lives. And for the many births that we have to come, or at least that I have to come, I hope that, my next birth I can take that here in Mayapur and learn from the very beginning of life about the, Krishna consciousness way of life. All right? Okay. Is that okay?
Yes.
Because Prabhupada started ISKCON in 1966, and in 1967, in May, he had this very serious heart attack. He was paralyzed for some time, and he had a lot of physical problems that came as a result of that heart attack. Even though he became functional again, he found it necessary to come back to India, I think in July of '67, to get some Ayurvedic treatment. And of course the atmosphere, the ambience of India, I think, helped him also. So when he came, he was here for 6 months. He went initially to Vrindavan, but he also traveled to Mayapur during 1967 with the intention of trying to find some land for what at that time he was calling his American house. He had a plan that at a minimum, because he had no expectations of Krishna consciousness spreading the way that it did all around the world so rapidly. But Prabhupada was thinking, at least even at that time in '67, when he had maybe 50 initiated devotees, disciples, he wanted to have a place in Vrindavan and another place in Mayapur where they could come and they could absorb, the philosophy and the lifestyle of Krishna consciousness. So that was his plan. He didn't have many resources at that time in '67, but he made a point of coming here to Mayapur. I think it may have been that Achyutananda was with him at that time. I'm not quite sure about that. That can be checked. But at least Prabhupada came here, sick as he was, but he was actively talking about finding some place for his foreign disciples, which he called his American house. Then, of course, he went back to the West at the end of 1967. He was very absorbed in spreading Krishna consciousness in America, and then it spread to Europe, went to Australia, went to Africa, went to Japan. It became a very big thing. So Prabhupada didn't come back to India for quite some time. When he did come back in 1970, August, he brought with him 4 sannyasis. He had a couple of disciples, Achyutananda and a couple of others, that were already here in India. And when he officially began ISKCON's preaching activities in India then, in 1970, the first place that he came to via Japan was Calcutta. And of course Calcutta is just down the road from Mayapur, so he did come out to Mayapur. And he began to push very strongly that we must have land in Mayapur. He had written to one of his godbrothers who had a lot of land, that if he could just spare some small area where he could build his American house, that would be very nice. That godbrother, of course, declined, so Prabhupada was determined then to have his own place. And he had been pushing Achyutananda, go to Mayapur, find out where the land is, get the prices, buy some land. Because probably his inexperience, Achyutananda was not able to fulfill that completely. But when Prabhupada personally came, and then immediately after his landing in Calcutta with these 4 sannyasis and his secretary, just a few weeks later, a batch of about 40 or 50 devotees arrived from the west in Bombay. Prabhupada went over there, and then there was a big series of pandals. ISKCON became a transcendental phenomena. People were very excited to see this guru who had converted, the Westerners to pure Vaishnavas. 20 to 30,000 people a night were coming for the pandals in Bombay, and then later on Gorakhpur and Delhi, and then Prabhupada came back to Mayapur and had the same success here. Not Mayapur, sorry, came back to Calcutta and had the same success there. So Prabhupada was really, really pushing when he saw now this reaction to his movement, very positive reaction amongst the public in India, that he really wanted to get a place. At that time he said Vrindavan, Mayapur and Jagannath Puri. As it turned, later on, of course, we got the land in Bombay. That became one of our big centres. And Prabhupada opened Vrindavan in 1975. He got land there, built the Krishna Balaram Mandir, which was the first custom-built temple in ISKCON, and which 40th anniversary is coming up this March 2015. So Prabhupada built that temple. Then once he had built that, completed it, he moved his resources to Bombay. That was his next big project. And then with that well on the way, then in 1976, 1977, Prabhupada again turned his attention to Mayapur, and he wanted to put all of the resources that he had available into building the Mayapur temple. Anyway, so right from the very beginning, Prabhupada had this idea of having land in Mayapur, 66, 67. He was pushing it for a few years, but when he came in 1970 and started ISKCON officially, its preaching in India, then he really started to put a lot of effort into finding land. And in 1971, Tamal Krishna Goswami in April was given power of attorney by Srila Prabhupada to travel to Mayapur and purchase the first few bighas of land from a gentleman called Jabed Ali Sheikh. He was a Muslim landowner, and he sold the first 1 or 2 bighas of land. And then very quickly after that we started buying more and more. And as soon as Prabhupada got that land, this hut was built, which we call the Bhajan Kutia now. Prabhupada came, he was living in one side of the hut, a few of his disciples were living in the other side, and Prabhupada was then thinking in this, sitting in this straw hut, but thinking about manifesting this transcendental city. He had very big ambitions, big program, and even though there apparently was no resources, no manpower, it was very difficult to get anybody to come and stay out here at the beginning, because it was just open paddy fields. But it was Prabhupada's desire, so that was the life and soul of his disciples. Jayapataka Maharaj, then Bhavananda Maharaj, Achyutananda, so many others, they came, and Mayapur began to manifest. So it was really, just due to the very strong desire of Srila Prabhupada. He knew the value of Mayapur, he knew the importance of Mayapur, he knew about the future importance of Mayapur, and he had his role to play in developing this transcendental city. So that was a big concern for him right from the very beginning of ISKCON's formation, that he wanted to have a place here. And we see immediately he built a building, this what we call the Lotus building, that was more or less completed by the end of 1973. As soon as he saw that there was some facility for a larger number of devotees with the 4-story building that he built, then he sent out a letter to all the temples in ISKCON saying that all the temple presidents and as many men as they could bring with them should come every year to Mayapur for the Gaurpurnima festival. So in 1974, it wasn't the first time that we had an international festival, but it was the first really significant in size, and it was because there was facility there with the Lotus building. And then from that point on, of course, then things began to grow very rapidly. By 1976 and 1977, the general public had become very excited about what was happening in Mayapur with the foreign devotees, what they call the Angraji Mandir, the British Mandir, and at least a couple of lakhs of public came in 1977, and Prabhupada was extremely pleased with that. So there was an idea there in Prabhupada's mind all along. It was just a question of when the resources would become available and he could do something. So he was very, very active and concerned to see that Mayapur become, if you like, the jewel in the crown, the mainstay of our movement. It's the heart of Krishna Consciousness movement, and he did as much as he was able, and he left us with a huge task to continue and build this big temple. So now finally we're on the verge of seeing that temple built, and I don't think even now we can understand what impact that's going to have, not just in India but around the world eventually, if we do it according to Prabhupada's instructions. So Prabhupada was, he was very concerned about the development of Mayapur. He wanted to put all of his resources into building this temple of the Vedic Planetarium, and he gave us, a strong impetus to make it become manifest. Did that make any sense? All right.